Hello everyone. In the previous video I discussed about checked and unchecked exception, their definition and one line of code to explain you which line can produce checked exception, which line cannot produce a checked exception. So first of all, let's discuss about checked exception with the help of an example. Let me write a code for you. File input stream fp is equal to new file input stream. Okay, so I'm just trying to open a connection here, abc.txt. okay, so actually the arrow has to be this way. Yeah, now you can see this, the compiler is giving me error. This line is actually about opening a connection to an existing file. The file may or may not exist here, right? The point is, this particular line tries to make a connection to the outer environment, as I explained you in the previous video. So compiler detects that this particular line can generate an exception of type file not found. So you can see here, file not found exception could be generated, and this exception, file not found exception, lies in the category of checked exception. Hence the compiler says that if you want to write this line, you have to write this line inside the try block, otherwise I'll keep on giving the error, because you see it forces you to write this line inside the try block. And I can just write here file not found exception, means this kind of exception could be thrown, so I'm catching it here. Okay, so see, now the error is gone, right? So what I'm trying to explain you here is, if a particular line tries to, the compiler checks that if a particular line tries to throw an exception which is of type checked exception, right, then compiler makes it mandatory for you to write that particular line of code inside the try block. Okay, so this is, now I handle it. You can write anything here if you want, system.out.println, and like file not found or anything. Okay, so if the file does not exist, means if while trying to make a connection with this file while my program is running, so this will generate an exception of type file not found, so this will be caught here, and hence I'll be able to catch my exception. Okay, so this is what checked exception is all about. So I'm just giving I'm just demonstrating one line of code to explain you how checked exception has to be thrown inside the try block only, how the compiler forces you that a particular line has to be written inside the try block. Okay, now you can see that if I just cut this line, and paste it outside the try block, outside the monitoring block, so definitely the compiler gives me error here. I mean, let's try to do it again. If I just copy this line and I paste it outside one more time, let's say this is fp2. okay, so compiler gives me error here. Okay, this line can generate an exception of type checked exception. It cannot be outside a try block, it has to be put inside the try block. Okay, so compiler checks this for us, and this is what I was talking about in the checked exception. Those statements whose handling is verified during the compile time are called checked exception. So it could be IO exception, file not found exception, some socket exception, SQL related exceptions, and so on. So you can, in an easy way, you can learn in this way all those programming statements which make a connection to the outer environment, like SQL statements, like database statements, networking statements, file statements, and so on. Okay, so those kind of lines can generate an exception which needs to be handled. Okay, that kind of statements actually generate an exception of type checked exception. Those fall into the category of checked exception. Okay, Okay, let's try to see unchecked exception here. So I remove this line. I just write int var is equal to 5 divided by 0. Now this line falls into the category of unchecked exception, means the compiler is not forcing you to write this particular line inside the try block, because the compiler checks that okay, this line can generate an exception of type arithmetic exception, okay, and arithmetic exception falls into the category of unchecked exception. Hence compiler does not make it mandatory for you to write this line inside the try block, okay. Hence it is unchecked exception, because compiler is not verifying this kind of exception during compile time, and hence unchecked. And this is what we discussed in our previous video, unchecked exception, okay. Compiler doesn't make it mandatory. Other kinds of error could be like index out of bound exception, right? Example, if I try to make an array arr is equal to new int of 5, and I try to access arr of 8th index is equal to value 10, compiler is not going to give me error, even though the error could be generated from here is of type index out of array index out of bounds exception. The compiler is not making it mandatory for me to write that line inside the try block, okay. So hence these kind of errors, these kind of lines where the exception could be thrown, and those thrown exception could be of type unchecked exception, so compiler is not making us mandatory to write those lines inside the try block. In other words, checked exception has to be inside the try block, unchecked exception lines may or may not be inside the try block, okay. So this is all about the checked and unchecked exception, okay. I hope you are able to understand the difference between checked and unchecked exception. So that's all about it. Do watch my future videos also, where I'll be explaining you the various kind of keywords in exception handling, okay.